The Barbados Senate, which many feel is a waste of time, will continue to be part of our system of government if the Barbados Constitutional Reform Commission recommendation is accepted. That is the focus of tonight's episode of Raising the Bar on Our Parliamentary Democracy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of BKGI. Let us know in the comment section what you think about the program. With that introduction, here is our presenter, Alden D. Tull, to continue talking on the theme, Raising the Bar of Our Democracy.
Good evening and welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, the issue we are discussing is that parliamentary representative democracy, as we now practice it in Barbados and throughout most of the Caribbean, has major flaws or dysfunctions. Those flaws are partly what is responsible for the corruption we see in the country. One of those major flaws is what has landed us with a 30-0 parliament, not once, but twice. For the last 4 episodes, we have been discussing solutions to these flaws. In the last 2 episodes, we have been examining how a proportional representation system could help eliminate the possibility of a 30-0 outcome, that is, another 30-0 outcome. But we have discovered that the Constitutional Reform Commission is recommending that we keep the first past the post system, which gave rise to these 2 30-0 parliaments in the first place. Today, in episode 5, we're going to explore how we can further improve our parliamentary democracy by expanding its checks and balances. Again, we'll look at what the Constitutional Reform Commission is recommending about this. The recommendations of the CRC should matter to every Barbadian because sooner rather than later, they're going to become the new Constitution of Barbados. We have put a link to the Commission's website in the description box below for your convenience. So, what do we mean by checks and balances? Because that's the topic we are considering tonight. In reference to a political system, checks and balances mean provisions or procedures which prevent one part or branch of the system of government from exercising power, undue power, or influence. A simple way of looking at this principle is to think of the valves on a pressure cooker. As heat is applied to the appliance, the pressure builds up inside. However, the typical pressure cooker has at least 2 valves, which can reduce this pressure inside without opening the appliance. Our proposition is that in addition to making the kind of changes to the system we have discussed in previous episodes, we need to expand our checks and balances in order to raise the bar of our democracy. Let's explain how this is supposed to work. So, most systems of government are divided into 3 branches: the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. As the name suggests, the legislature is that branch of government that makes laws or legislation. In Barbados, that would be the lower house and the Senate. The judiciary is the system of law courts. Its job is to interpret and apply the laws passed by the legislature. The court system is itself divided into different levels, such as the High Court and Supreme Court. Technically speaking, the police force is part of the judiciary, and its role is therefore to enforce the decisions of the court and of course the laws of the country in general. Finally, there is the executive branch of government. That would be the Prime Minister and a cabinet of ministers who are responsible for running the daily affairs of the country, from health and wellness, education, the economy, etc. The question then is this: how do we prevent one branch of government from exercising too much power or going rogue, for that matter? That is what checks and balances are for. But Do we already have checks and balances? If we are going to make a case for expanding them, we need to look at what currently exists to determine whether they're adequate. A useful way of thinking about checks and balances is to divide them into two groups, horizontal and vertical. By vertical checks and balances, we mean checks and balances across the three branches of government: legislature, judiciary, and executive. By vertical checks and balances, we mean provisions within one of the branches of government to prevent an abuse of power. For example, checks and balances in the legislature or judiciary. Let's look at the checks and balances inside the legislative branch of government, which consists of the lower house and the upper house or Senate. In essence, the upper house or Senate is supposed to act as a check and balance on the lower house. The Senate consists of 21 members. However, the problem is this: as currently constituted, 12 of those senators are appointed by the government, 2 by the opposition, and 7 are independent senators appointed at the discretion of the President of the country. It does not require a degree in rocket science to work out that the 12 government senators are a majority, so any legislation passed in the lower house will automatically be passed by the Senate, all other things being equal. This is a dysfunction, and it is a dysfunction which continues to be a problem for our democracy. It is a problem that has been discussed many times in our recent political history, but nothing has been done about it to date. From time to time, it has been suggested that the Senate ought to be abolished, but given the basic need for checks and balances, that might not be a good idea. What we really need instead is a reform of the Senate. The question then is, how do we do that? A simple solution would be to have equal amounts of government senators, opposition senators, and independent senators. In other words, 7 from each group. However, we would immediately run into the kind of problem experienced in the last 2 elections. If there's no opposition, then there can be no opposition senators. Incidentally, this is one very good reason why we need to institute a proportional representation system, as discussed in the last episode, because this will ensure that there's an opposition in the first place. Now let's see what the Constitutional Reform Commission is recommending with regard to the Senate. As you can see from the image on your screen, the Constitutional Reform Commission has recommended that the Senate be retained and that the number of senators remain the same, that is 21. However, the Commission is recommending some changes in the composition of the Senate. The number of government-appointed senators is to remain the same, but the number of opposition and independent senators is to be adjusted as shown. 4 opposition senators, an increase of 2, and 5 independent senators, a decrease of 2. Now, while the increase in opposition senators is welcome, the problem still remains that if there is no opposition party in the lower house, then technically there can be no opposition senators as such. This is the situation that obtained in 2018 and 2022, when the Barbados Labour Party won all 30 seats on each occasion. In addition, government senators are still a majority by 2 members. So even if the 4 opposition members and 5 independent members vote against a piece of legislation, all things being equal, it can still be passed by the majority government senators. The other recommended changes regarding the Senate have to do with its gender composition. As the exhibit shows, Essentially, the Commission is calling for some gender balance, which is quite appropriate and welcome. In conclusion, the Commission's recommendations have not really resolved the key issue of government dominance of the Senate at all. Of course, the operation of the Senate is not just a matter of mathematics. Much has to do with the integrity of the opposition and independent senators in particular. Ideally, we want both opposition and independent senators that will not oppose for the sake of opposition, but vote out of conscience and/or out of genuine differences in policy. That being said, we hope that these issues with our system of government can be resolved before the revised Constitution becomes law. Let us know in the comment section what you think about the ideas discussed here. Have a safe and productive week. Thank you for viewing and thank you for subscribing.